Tonight, she makes her way back into the very house that had once been her undoing, not seeking forgiveness, not yearning for affection, but with the intention of setting it ablaze. The iron gates stand wide open, resembling the gaping jaws of a monstrous beast. Golden light spills out across the stone driveway, leading to a mansion where every smile is a carefully crafted weapon, and every toast conceals a well-hidden lie. To the outside world, it's a charity gala, a sophisticated affair. But to her, it's a battlefield, a stage set for a final confrontation. And at the center of it all stands the man she should have never allowed herself to love, her former father-in-law. 3 years prior, she had fled this crumbling dynasty, utterly humiliated, betrayed by those she trusted, and freshly divorced from the golden boy who was adored by everyone. Her name had been dragged through the tabloids, becoming synonymous with scandal and misfortune. Now, she's living in a cramped, tiny studio apartment, barely scraping together enough money for rent with the meager wages she earns at a local coffee shop. She watches helplessly as her mother slowly fades away in a sterile hospital bed. Every bill that arrives feels like a sharp blade, cutting into her already strained finances. Every cough her mother lets out serves as a constant reminder. Fight for survival, or simply vanish into the shadows. And then, the envelope arrived, heavy ivory paper, completely devoid of a return address, bearing only her name scrawled across it like a sentence carved in stone. Dominic Langston, billionaire, patriarch, the ultimate judge, jury, and executioner of a family that thrives on secrets and deception. He is the last man she should ever lay eyes on, the one who condemned her without ever bothering to ask why she did what she did. She should have burned the invitation, reduced it to ashes. But hospital wards don't accept empty promises or heartfelt apologies. They only accept cold, hard cash. So, she reluctantly slipped into a borrowed black gown, painted her lips a vibrant red as if to serve as a warning, and stepped back into the lion's den, bracing herself for whatever might come. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast a shimmering light across faces that have been polished into flawless masks. Champagne flutes glitter and sparkle. Violins play melodies that are almost too sweet, and every laugh is tinged with the unmistakable taste of poison. She navigates through the crowded room with her chin held high, her heartbeat pounding in her chest like a drum. Every footstep she takes is a bold declaration. I came back. I'm not afraid. And then, she sees him. Dominic, broad shoulders draped in luxurious black silk, salt and pepper hair perfectly combed into place, eyes of cold, unforgiving steel that slice through the crowd like the sharpest blade. Time hasn't softened him. It has only served to sharpen his already formidable presence. His mere presence seems to bend the very room around him, commanding silence without him uttering a single word. When his gaze finally settles upon her, it isn't surprise that she sees. It's recognition, the acknowledgement of a ghost returning to haunt him. She doesn't flinch, doesn't give him the satisfaction. Instead, she crosses the marble floor and heads straight for the bar, ordering a glass of champagne with steady fingers. Even as her racing pulse threatens to betray her composure, she knows that he's watching her every move. And then, without warning, his hand clamps tightly around her wrist, the air cracking like the sound of a gunshot. Outside now, his voice is rough, low, and laced with danger. The biting winter air stings her skin as he roughly drags her into the garden. Behind them, the music continues to play as if nothing out of the ordinary has occurred. Roses bloom in expensive frost, their delicate beauty a stark contrast to the dangerous situation unfolding. But their thorns glisten even sharper under the cold moonlight. What the hell are you doing here, Arya? His words are dripping with venom. You sent the invitation, she fires back, refusing to be intimidated. I didn't think you'd actually come. Then why send it in the first place? She asks, her voice laced with defiance. To see if you're still the same reckless girl who nearly destroyed this family and everything I've worked for. Her laugh is bitter and humorless. You know damn well why I left. Your perfect son ruined me. You just didn't want to see it, blinded by your love for him. His eyes narrow, his voice sounding like grinding gravel. You ran. You couldn't face the consequences of your actions, the fallout from what you did. Her jaw tightens with anger. I came back because my mother is dying. Because the Langstons owe me. For every lie, every betrayal, every door slammed in my face. For a long moment, silence hangs heavy between them, broken only by the whisper of the wind rustling through the bare branches of the trees. Then, his gaze drops to her mouth, her throat, the bare skin exposed to the moonlight. What glimmers there isn't just anger. It's a raw, undeniable hunger, the kind they've both denied for far too many years. I'll cover everything, he says finally, his voice softening slightly. The best doctors, the best care, whatever it takes to save her. Her eyes narrow suspiciously. In exchange for what, Dominic? What do you want from me? 1 month, he replies, his gaze intense. You move back into this house. Work with me side by side. Help me revive the Langston Foundation. And then his voice darkens, taking on an ominous tone. But stay out of the West Wing, and especially do not enter the locked room. I forbid it. She lets out a hollow, mocking laugh. A deal with the devil. How fitting. You'll say yes, he murmurs, his eyes fixed on her. Because you'll do absolutely anything for your mother. I know you. And there it is, the truth laid bare between them, sharp and merciless, like a wound reopened. She should turn away, walk away, and never look back. She should run as fast and far as she can. But when he leans closer, when her name leaves his lips like a curse, Arya, her resolve begins to tremble. You have absolutely no idea what you're walking into, he warns, his eyes burning like storm clouds about to unleash their fury. She raises her chin, meeting his gaze head-on. Then I'll just have to walk in and find out, won't I? Inside, applause erupts as another speech comes to an end. But out here in the frozen garden, another, far more dangerous story is about to begin. A story of revenge and forbidden fire. A story where love is both a prison and an escape. A story that will dare to ask the questions that no one else dares to answer. Why would a ruthless billionaire risk absolutely everything for the very woman he blames for his family's downfall? Can love truly survive when it's built on a foundation of lies, insatiable hunger, and deep betrayal? And when the last secret is finally revealed, will it ultimately destroy them both? The truth waiting behind that locked door at the end of the corridor is far darker and more twisted than she could ever possibly imagine. She was born into a world of scarcity and struggle, and every single choice she made carried the immense weight of survival. Arya grew up watching her mother tirelessly struggle against poverty, sacrificing sleep for endless shifts at work, holding their tiny, fragile world together with nothing but scraps of hope and unwavering determination. The streets she came from were a universe away from the marble floors and glittering chandeliers of the Langston dynasty, a world of unimaginable wealth and privilege. For her, wealth had always been a window, something she could only press her face against and dream about. Never a door she could actually walk through and experience firsthand. That all changed the moment she met Landon Langston, the golden boy of a family whose vast empire stretched across Manhattan like a glittering crown. To the outside world, he was the very embodiment of charm and privilege, the heir apparent who seemingly had everything his heart could ever desire. But to Arya, he represented something far more significant. A promise of escape, a chance at belonging to a life she had only ever dreamed of. But dreams can often be far crueler than reality, and hers quickly curdled into a full-blown scandal the moment she stepped into the blinding spotlight beside him. At first, she played the role well, effortlessly adopting the borrowed gowns, the carefully rehearsed smiles, the demeanor of the perfect wife who knew precisely when to laugh and when to remain silent. She mastered the delicate art of gracefully hiding her trembling hands beneath a dazzling array of diamond bracelets. Yet, no amount of polish or careful coaching could ever completely erase the whispers, the judgmental stares, the unspoken accusations. The wives of Manhattan's elite called her an opportunist, a gold digger who had only married Landon for his money and status. The tabloids painted her as nothing more than a scandal wrapped in expensive satin, and through it all, she endured, silently bearing the weight of their scorn. until the night her marriage spectacularly collapsed in full public view, leaving her completely cast out and utterly disgraced. She walked away, not with a severance of riches or a comfortable settlement, but with a mountain of debt, a tarnished reputation, and a stain so deep that it followed her into every low-paying coffee shop job, every tense conversation with her unforgiving landlord, and every overdue hospital bill that landed like a physical blow across her chest. Her mother's illness became a heavy chain around her ankle, dragging her deeper and deeper into a pit of desperation. Every single time she had to beg for an extension on a bill or scrape together every last coin for another life-saving prescription, she thought of the world she had once briefly inhabited, the glittering world that had ultimately spat her out and left her for dead. And at the very center of that world stood Dominic Langston, the formidable patriarch. He was everything his son wasn't. Controlled where Landon was reckless, sharp and calculating where Landon was careless and impulsive. Power seemed to wrap itself around him like a second skin, an intrinsic part of his very being. When Arya first entered the family, Dominic had regarded her with the cold, detached curiosity of a seasoned general measuring up a potential rival. He believed she was unworthy of his son, nothing more than a fleeting distraction, a spark that could potentially ignite and burn his carefully constructed empire from within. When the marriage inevitably crumbled, he never bothered to ask why. He simply delivered his verdict in silence. Guilty. To him, she was the woman who had broken his son's heart and irreparably shamed his family's name. Yet, beneath that carefully cultivated disdain lived a history of shadows, a past haunted by loss and grief. Dominic's beloved wife, Vivian, had tragically died 2 years prior in what the world had simply written off as a tragic accident. The mansion still carried her ghostly presence, her lingering perfume permeating the halls, the locked doors that no one dared to open, and a profound grief that Dominic had ruthlessly buried beneath his relentless command of both business and family. If Arya was shaped and defined by hunger, humiliation, and constant struggle, Dominic was carved and molded by overwhelming loss and simmering rage. He was not merely a billionaire. He was a man who had painstakingly spent decades building an unshakable empire from iron will and immense sacrifice, only to watch it slowly fracture and crumble under the weight of betrayal, addiction, and devastating scandal. His public reputation was seemingly unshakable, his vast wealth unmeasurable, his control over every aspect of his life absolute. Yet, his eyes often betrayed something far darker, something hidden beneath the surface. A man who had silently bled for years, who wore his armor not only to protect himself from the outside world, but also to keep everyone at a safe distance. He could effortlessly command entire rooms with his presence, silence reporters with a single piercing glance, make seasoned politicians hesitate before daring to speak. But he could not, no matter how hard he tried, control the ghosts that haunted his mansion's corridors or the undeniable hunger that grew within him each time Arya dared to defy him. Their connection was not forged in sweetness or tender affection but in fire, a dangerous chemistry that neither of them dared to name or acknowledge. He saw her as a liability, a potential threat to his carefully constructed world. Yet, he also couldn't help but see her courage, her unwavering refusal to bow down or be silenced, the spark that could not be extinguished, even when the entire world had branded her as ruined and irredeemable. She saw him as the very embodiment of the dynasty that had ruthlessly destroyed her life, yet also as the one man whose inherent strength mirrored her own deeply buried scars. Every glance that passed between them was nothing short of a battlefield, a silent declaration of war. Every word spoken was a carefully chosen weapon, laced with hidden barbs and unspoken desires. Yet, there was something else there too, something unspoken, threading itself through their hatred like smoke curling through locked doors. The night of the gala had reignited it, but the truth was that it had never truly died. It had always been there, an unholy tether binding a woman born in struggle to a man drowning in grief, dragging them both toward a destiny that neither of them truly wanted, but neither of them could resist. And in the shadows of the sprawling Langston estate, beneath the glittering chandeliers and carefully guarded secrets, the stage was finally set. What began as a desperate act of survival for Arya and a calculated assertion of control for Dominic was about to unravel into something that neither of them could contain, something far more dangerous than either of them could have ever imagined. The mansion would not just test them. It would consume them, forcing them to confront the ghosts they carried and the undeniable fire they could no longer deny. The night of their unexpected reunion was not the end of anything. It was merely the spark that ignited something far more dangerous and all-consuming. The cold garden air still clung to Arya's skin when she finally returned inside. But the moment she crossed the ballroom threshold, the entire atmosphere of the room seemed to shift and change. She could feel Dominic's eyes on her, an invisible tether that pulled her even as she desperately tried to resist its magnetic force. She moved through the sea of expensive gowns and perfectly tailored tuxedos, careful to not let her inner trembling show, maintaining a facade of composure. Every clinking champagne glass sounded like a countdown, a ticking clock counting down to the inevitable explosion. She knew she should keep her distance from him, avoid him at all costs. But fate, it seemed, rarely listens to reason. It happened at the bar, a brief brush of his presence, a hand that tightened around her wrist without any warning, pulling her back out into the cold night where words cut far sharper than any wind. What she hadn't expected was the barely perceptible tremor in his voice, the flicker of raw emotion in his eyes, the undeniable hunger that momentarily slipped through his carefully constructed armor of hatred and control. It was then that she realized that this war between them was no longer solely about survival. It was about temptation, a dangerous game that neither of them could afford to play. Days later, the bargain they had struck became terrifyingly real. Dominic arrived, not at a glittering gala, but on the broken steps of her crumbling apartment building, the stark contrast almost comical. He stood there, cloaked in black, a shadow that simply did not belong in this neighborhood of peeling paint and rusted railings. His offer was clear and brutally simple. Her mother's life saved, in exchange for her return to the Langston estate, a return to the gilded cage she had so desperately tried to escape. The decision was less a choice and more a grim sentence, a life-altering directive she could not refuse. When Arya walked up the grand marble staircase of Langston Manor once again, it felt less like a homecoming and more like walking straight into a gilded prison, a beautiful but suffocating cage. The halls echoed with the whispers of ghosts. The portraits seemed to watch her with cold, judgmental eyes, and behind every single locked door lay secrets sharp enough to cut and wound. She wore her defiance like a suit of armor, but even the strongest armor grows heavy and burdensome after a while. At lavish dinners with wealthy donors, she forced herself to smile and make polite conversation. At endless charity meetings, she flawlessly performed her assigned role, flawlessly reciting her lines and hitting every single mark. But at night, when the mansion finally quieted and the shadows grew long, she could feel his heavy presence pressing against her walls, testing her, watching her, patiently waiting for her to crack. The first real clash between them came quickly and unexpectedly. A lingering glance across the long library table lasted just a little too long, his intense gaze drilling into her until her breath faltered and her carefully constructed composure began to crumble. Every footstep became a silent duel, a delicate dance of power and control. Every conversation was nothing more than a carefully orchestrated skirmish of words, each one edged with both undeniable desire and palpable danger. She swore to herself that she was simply playing him, edging closer and closer, only to uncover what he was desperately trying to hide about his late wife's tragic death, about the mysterious locked room, about the entire dynasty that thrived on secrets and rot. But there were moments, brief and fleeting, when she betrayed herself, when the sheer heat of his smoldering stare left her shaking and breathless, when the accidental brush of his hand against hers made her pulse quicken against her own will, betraying her carefully guarded emotions. She told herself it was all simply a tactic, a means to an end. She told herself it was all about revenge, paying him back for the pain he had inflicted upon her. Yet, each night she lay wide awake in her bed, replaying every single syllable, every stolen look, every unspoken dare that had passed between them, torturing herself with the memory. Hatred had always been her mask, her shield, her carefully constructed defense mechanism, and now it was slowly slipping away, revealing something far more dangerous that neither of them could ultimately contain or control. The breaking point finally came in a dimly lit room bathed in the warm glow of firelight, the atmosphere thick with unspoken tension. It began with a challenge, a daring accusation. She accused him of hiding, of burying the truth beneath layers of rigid rules and crippling grief. He, in turn, accused her of being a dangerous woman who had absolutely no place under his roof, a threat to everything he held dear. The air in the room thickened until the spoken words finally gave way to a deafening silence. A silence far louder and more unsettling than any raging storm. Then, without any warning whatsoever, the silence shattered. His hand shot out and caught her wrist in a vice-like grip. The door slammed shut with a resounding crash, and then his mouth crashed against hers, with the pent-up force of years of denial collapsing into one reckless and utterly consuming moment. It was not gentle or tender. It was raw hunger dressed as war, crippling grief disguised as furious rage. For a heartbeat, she resisted him, pushing against him with all her strength, but only for a single heartbeat. Then, she matched him, kiss for kiss, defiance for defiance, until a roaring fire consumed every last trace of the ice that had separated them. When they finally pulled apart, breathless and burning with an undeniable passion, both of them knew that a line had irrevocably been crossed. There would be no return to the hatred they had once claimed as truth, no going back to the way things were. There was only this new, forbidden gravity, pulling them together into each other's orbits, deeper than either of them dared to admit, darker than either of them could ultimately survive. And though neither of them spoke it aloud, they both silently understood. From this moment on, every secret, every betrayal, every locked door would lead them toward a catastrophic collision that could potentially destroy them both. The kiss did not end the war between them. It only served to sharpen it, to make it even more dangerous and volatile. By morning, Dominic avoided her, his usual seat at the formal dining table left conspicuously empty, his name mysteriously missing from all of the foundation's schedules. But his absence did nothing to erase the vivid memory of his mouth on hers, or the lingering heat that still burned just beneath her skin. Arya carried that memory with her into every corridor of the sprawling mansion, every hushed conversation with the board members, every forced smile she had to plaster on her face in front of society's elite. Yet, the more she tried to bury it deep down, the more it consumed her, and soon it collided head-on with something far more dangerous than mere desire. The deeply buried secrets that the Langston dynasty had spent decades carefully hiding from the world. Late one evening, while searching through the rarely used east wing of the mansion, she discovered the locked door once again, its keypad gleaming like a silent warning, and this time, she finally found a way to bypass the security and get inside. What she found inside was not emptiness or dust, but a shrine, a carefully curated testament to a life tragically cut short. Journals meticulously lined up in neat rows, the air thick with the lingering scent of her signature rose perfume, letters neatly tied with crimson ribbon that bled with Vivian Langston's despair and unspoken pain. The truth was undeniable, staring her right in the face. She had not simply died in an unfortunate accident. She had been slowly pushed toward the edge by manipulation, insidious betrayal, and hushed whispers that pointed not only to Camille, but to the entire twisted house of Langston. Arya's hands trembled uncontrollably as she frantically read the heartbreaking words of a woman who had been slowly gaslit into oblivion, her very sanity questioned and eroded. If this devastating secret ever reached the light of day, the entire dynasty would shatter into a million pieces. But secrets are never unearthed without a steep cost. Dominic found her there, standing in the middle of the room, holding the incriminating journals in her trembling hands like dangerous weapons. His rage was immediate and explosive, his voice sharp enough to wound. Yet beneath the surface fury, she detected something else. A palpable fear of the truth finally being exposed, fear of the ghosts he could no longer banish to the shadows. They fought in the study, words slicing through the air like knives, until she finally demanded to know why his wife had written about her in her private journals. He faltered for a moment, visibly shaken. He admitted fragments of the truth, offering half-truths and veiled explanations, cloaked in the guise of protection. but his carefully crafted silence ultimately spoke far louder than his actual words. Vivian had somehow known about Arya long before her death. She had seen the undeniable spark between them, and Dominic, for all his immense power and control, had desperately buried that knowledge deep down, hiding it beneath layers of grief and a fierce determination to maintain control. Arya felt the very ground shift beneath her feet. She was no longer simply a victim of the ruthless dynasty. She was an integral piece of the tragic story that had ultimately destroyed it. As she wrestled with this earth-shattering revelation, other enemies began to close in around her, their motives far more insidious. Landon reappeared, his once charming facade now corroded into bitter venom. He warned her to stay far away from his father, calling her a mere pawn in a twisted game she could never possibly win. His words echoed those of Camille, who slithered through the mansion like a snake, her smiles hiding daggers. Both of them knew that Arya was dangerous because she was too close, far too close to unraveling the intricate web of lies and deceit they had carefully spun for so many years. When a valuable family portrait mysteriously vanished from the library, Camille seized the opportunity to strike. Arya was immediately accused of theft, paraded before Dominic as a liar and a traitor. She desperately clutched the letters in her trembling hands, begging him to see the truth that was staring him right in the face. But the seeds of betrayal had already been planted, and they had taken root. Dominic's eyes, once blazing with undeniable hunger and desire, turned cold and hard once again, devoid of any emotion. With a single, emotionless command, she was unceremoniously cast out of the house, the iron gates slamming shut behind her like a final, irreversible verdict. The taste of exile was bitter and familiar, but what hollowed her out even deeper was the sudden wave of nausea rising in her stomach. The terrifying realization whispered into the silence of the night. She was pregnant, carrying Dominic Langston's child. The weeks that followed were nothing more than a blur of desperate escape and frantic planning. Arya vanished to the remote coast, trading the glittering chandeliers for a tiny cottage with cracked windows and peeling paint, hiding under a false name and praying she wouldn't be found. She tried to build a wall of silence around her, hoping to disappear completely. But silence, she quickly learned, does not erase destiny. News always seeped through, carried by the whispers in the newspapers and the gossip of strangers. The Langston Empire was slowly unraveling, falling apart at the seams. Dominic's iron grip on his family and his business was fracturing under immense pressure. Camille tightened her claws, determined to protect her own interests at any cost. Landon dragged the family name through the mud, engaging in one scandal after another. Yet, even as the dynasty burned to the ground, Arya could not escape the invisible tether that bound her to it. One night, Dominic appeared at her doorstep, looking worn down by battles, his immense power seemingly stripped bare. He saw the ultrasound photo lying on her small table, undeniable proof of a new life neither of them had expected, a life conceived in fire and shadow. His voice cracked with emotion as he asked the question she had been dreading since the moment she found out she was pregnant. "Is this mine, Arya?" The answer bound them together once again, not with mere desire, but with blood, with a shared future, with a secret far too fragile to survive the coming storm. But the storm was already here, brewing on the horizon. Camille struck back, orchestrating Arya's abduction, binding her in a cold, damp room that reeked of concrete and betrayal. For the very first time, Arya fully realized just how much her life had become currency in a dangerous game she had never asked to play. Yet, even tied to a chair, bruised, bleeding, and terrified, she refused to break, refused to give them the satisfaction. She thought of her mother, of the innocent child growing inside her, of the haunted look on Dominic's face when he swore he would protect her from harm. And when he finally tore through the door, ripping the ropes from her wrists, she finally understood that their bond was not just about forbidden temptation anymore. It was about survival, a shared need to protect each other from a world that wanted to tear them apart. Together, they stood defiantly before the cameras and the crowds, exposing Camille's manipulations and treachery, dragging Landon's disgrace into the harsh light of day, dismantling the corrupt empire brick by poisoned brick. Dominic renounced his dynasty, severing all ties. The Langston crown crumbled and fell to the ground, but the price they had to pay was incredibly steep. Their names were forever stained, their hard-won peace incredibly fragile, their precious child fighting for her life in a hospital ward where every single breath was a desperate prayer. In the end, their love was no longer a question of desire or forbidden passion. It was a question of endurance, a test of their ability to withstand the immense pressure and overcome the forces trying to tear them apart. Could two people born from ruin truly build something unbreakable and lasting? Or would the relentless ghosts of their past ultimately consume them before they ever had the chance? The answer waited, not in the opulent halls of the Langston mansion, but in the fragile cry of a newborn baby fighting desperately to live. The utter collapse of the Langston dynasty did not bring them lasting peace. It brought them a reckoning, a harsh accounting for their actions. After the long-buried truth finally spilled into the open, after Camille was unmasked for the manipulative monster she truly was, and after Landon finally destroyed himself in a spectacular blaze of scandal, the vast empire that Dominic had ruthlessly ruled for decades was reduced to nothing but ashes. The man who had once effortlessly commanded boardrooms and silenced rivals now stood stripped of all his power, carrying only his crippling guilt, his overwhelming grief, and a fragile hope that true love could somehow be rebuilt from the ruins of their shattered past. Arya stood resolutely beside him, no longer the disgraced outcast who had simply stumbled into his world, but a strong, resilient woman who had faced unimaginable betrayal, devastating exile, and near-death experiences, and had still somehow endured, refusing to be broken. Yet survival, as she had learned the hard way, came at an incredibly high cost. The constant stress of keeping dark secrets, the violence of constant betrayal, the endless nights of gnawing hunger and crippling fear. All of it bore down on her fragile body until the moment she doubled over in excruciating pain, clutching her stomach, gasping out the terrifying words that froze Dominic's blood. "It's the baby. Something's wrong." The hospital was a disorienting blur of sterile lights and frantic hands. Machines screamed, doctors shouted urgent commands, and Dominic, once the unshakable patriarch who always remained in complete control, fell to his knees in desperate prayer, begging for a miracle. Arya gripped his hand with every last ounce of strength she possessed, whispering through her tears that she would not lose this child, that they had fought far too hard for this precious life to simply vanish before it had even truly begun. Hours stretched into an agonizing eternity, each painful contraction a brutal battle, each unsettling silence between the beeping monitors a knife twisting deeper and deeper. When at long last the faint cry came, thin but undeniably alive, both terrified parents broke down into uncontrollable sobs of relief, clinging to each other for support. Their daughter was small and fragile, but she was breathing, she was alive. Against every shadow that had haunted them, against every dark curse that had plagued the Langston family for generations, she lived, a tiny beacon of hope in the darkness. They named her Ella, a name whispered with reverence and profound gratitude. And in her tiny, perfect fists wrapped tightly around Arya's trembling finger, Dominic saw something he had never known before, something he had thought was forever beyond his reach: salvation. But even as they rocked their newborn daughter in the quiet glow of the nursery lamp, the ghosts of the past refused to remain buried, determined to haunt them forever. An ominous envelope arrived, slipped silently under their front door like a malevolent spirit returning to claim what was due. The message contained within was short and concise, the words as sharp and deadly as a finely honed knife. "You do not know the full truth of your blood, Arya. Your father was not who you believed him to be. His fate was inextricably bound to the Langstons in ways you cannot even begin to imagine." A wave of crippling fear coursed through her veins as she realized that her story was far from over, that her very blood carried long-buried secrets that were far older than her fleeting shame and far deeper than Dominic's overwhelming grief. Yet when she turned to him, tears streaming down her face, his strong hand closed over hers with unwavering strength and resolve. "We'll face it together, whatever it is," he said, his eyes locked on hers. And for the first time in a very long time, she truly believed him. Their love was not soft or simple, not the kind of love born of fairy tales and happy endings. It was forged in the fires of scandal, betrayal, and in the crumbling ruins of a dynasty that had devoured its own. It was a love that often felt like both a prison and a key all at once, a dangerous paradox they were constantly navigating. They had been enemies, pawns, betrayers, each inflicting deep wounds on the other. But standing together over their daughter's crib, listening to her fragile breaths fill the silent room, they became something else entirely. Survivors, who had ultimately chosen each other in spite of everything that had tried to tear them apart. The world could call it forbidden, dangerous, a terrible mistake written in blood, but to them, it was the only truth that mattered, the kind of undeniable truth that burns away the deepest lies, even if it leaves behind permanent scars. In the end, Arya did not find freedom by running away from the Langston estate. She found it in returning, tearing down its walls brick by brick, and planting the seeds of new life in its ashes. And Dominic, the man who had once been her potential executioner, became her fiercest protector, her unwavering shield against the world. Love born in darkness had nearly destroyed them both. But in the radiant light of their daughter's first dawn, it offered them something they had never known before, something they had thought was forever beyond their reach: redemption. So, the haunting question that had plagued them both from the very beginning was finally answered at last. Was this love a cage, trapping them in the past? Or was it deliverance, setting them free? The definitive answer lay in the fragile cry of their newborn child, in the hushed vows whispered between two broken souls, in their unwavering decision to walk into the future, not as prisoner and captor, but as two resilient survivors, irrevocably bound together by a fire that no amount of betrayal could ever extinguish. And for those who watched their tumultuous story unfold, one undeniable truth remained unshakable. Sometimes, love is not the opposite of ruin. Sometimes, love is precisely what rises from it.